And I think we are live, and hopefully everything's working. Let me know as always if sound, video, everything, that you can see the stuff and it's all up to snuff. With that said, welcome to the show here at 8 o'clock in Denmark, at least, or 20 or whatever the stuff. And we have a new topic to discuss. Tonight's show is going to be very, very relaxed. We're going to be talking about, kind of what you saw in the title of the live stream. And that's going to be the thing. And as always, if you are watching the show live, then please let me know you're here in the chat. Just write, say hello or something. I can see that Shadon already said hello. It's not going to be a super big show tonight. I think it's just going to be very relaxed. The way the show works, if you are new to the show, basically it runs for between 2 and 3 hours. Maybe today's going to be a little bit shorter than 2 hours. Just because I got some other stuff to do, and it's an open show, so we just have a topic. We're gonna discuss that, and then if you have any questions about the topic or just anything, whatever you wanna ask or discuss, then you just hit it in the chat, and then we'll discuss it. And yeah, that's kind of how it works. And now you can see my face in all its big glory. You see my tired eyes, my scruffy hair, and my mustache, which is the most commented thing usually in the chat. There's always somebody saying mustache at some point or somewhere in the comments or whatever, and that's just become my signature look. And it does actually look okay today. It's not too bad today. I never do anything beyond this. That's kind of just how it works. It's actually funny today. I was down. I went with a friend across the. We lived by some water, and then we went across this sluice gate. I think it's called a bridge, basically. And then there's a cafe on the other side, and we bought a lemonade or something. And then I went in to pay, and it's kind of I pay with card, but card on my phone doesn't matter. In any case, I'm paying for the lemonade. The guy's like, "Cool, thanks." I see the transaction goes through. My friend is with me. I then leave, having just paid. Then my friend is taking a little bit longer. He also just getting a lemonade, and he comes back with a smile on his face, and I'm like, "What are you smiling about?" He's like, "Oh, it's just funny because when you left, apparently the transaction didn't go through from when I had just paid." I was like, "Oh, okay," but he really liked your mustache. I'm like, "Oh, okay, great." He's like, "So it's I feel like you got some bonus points there for just walking away from the receipt and then just getting a compliment that never happens. It's usually the other way around. But hey, you didn't pay. But he paid for me, right? So it's all okay. But that's just kind of funny. So yeah, that's what's happening. Okay, and the topic of the show today is the thing that you saw in the title, which is that we're going to be discussing just terms like designer, illustrator, painter, drawer, and the difference between painting and drawing. And we're going to talk about them in ways where we're not just going to define where they are. We're going to talk about them in terms of kind of mindset, and how that can be helpful, probably in a whole bunch of different ways. And while we're discussing that, it's not going to be a really heavy discussion, but while we're discussing it, I'm going to just be drawing in front of me. So I'm going to switch over to the scene, and then there's a shark right now. There's a shark, but I'm just going to be drawing something whilst talking. So hopefully it's just going to be a chill evening. So you guys are super welcome to shoot. I would put on some music, but I'm not gonna put on music because I actually got a copyright strike somewhat before, and I could just, I could probably just figure it out. But I haven't figured out yet how to do the music thing properly. But I suggest that you find some music of your own, put that on. If you're having this on the side, then just relax, and I'll try to make my voice as non-annoying as possible while we're discussing. And I'm just going to be talking a little bit, and hopefully that's going to be worth it. We will take a break at some point, probably around the half-hour mark. In 1 hour, there'll be a 5-minute break or something like that, so everyone can go to the various things. But I'm glad for everyone who joined. I hope people also joined we had kind of 2 streams in the past week. We had a review stream last Thursday, then a review stream in the weekend. And if any of you were there, I think some of you guys were there. If any of you were there, then And thanks for joining, and I hope that you guys got something out of it if you were there. And if you're not watching this live, you can go back and watch that. And as always, I'm super open to questions, chatting, anything really. You can just shoot about anything. Who do we actually have here today? We have Shaden, you're there. Yes, saw you. We got Alper here. Nice, awesome. Rudra, hi, hello to you. Plexiglass, hello. Nice shirt, thank you. I'm assuming it's probably this one, not the plain white one. And Shaden writes, hey, I'm guessing that's to my ridiculous story. Any case. Okay, so I need to just warm up my brain a little bit as we're talking about this thing. It is a thing I've talked about many times, and I'm just gonna kind of funnily write the things out here. Illustration. We can do like a little bit of font. Illustrator. So in discussing these different things, I think there's just some really helpful things. I think especially if you are, let me know actually in the chat, if you are looking to get into the industry, or you just started in the industry, or you don't really know anything about it, but you're curious about some of these things, just let me know your current status. Are you looking to get into the industry? Does any of the terms kind of confuse you? Where you're like, hey, what's an illustrator? What's your you know, where you're heading, right? Because I think I've actually talked to lots of students who are, also if you're a student, let me know if you're a student, who are slightly confused about these terms, or exactly what you need for the industry and what are the different roles. And I think actually it's really important, because I don't think it's always really well discussed. I'm gonna write it out kind of nicely here. Student currently. Also, what is my pen? XP pen. I actually use an XP pen. I use this tablet right here. It's called the XP Pen Deco 01. I use it because it's, I used to use a Wacom, right? But then I think Wacoms are too expensive for what they give you. They're nice, they're always nice, but this XP pen is actually really good. And it's like 60 euro or something, so I highly recommend it. Okay, so let's talk about some of those terms like concept artist, illustrator, designer, drawer, painter. And then we can actually talk about some bigger terms. Then sometimes people are like, oh, what's a concept designer? What's a illustrator? What else here do we got? Background artist, that's also kind of interesting. That's kind of self-explanatory, but still. Environment artist. Environment artist. Okay, so these are a few different terms. Will there be a recording of the stream? Yes, there will be a recording of the stream. You can always rewatch all the streams. Should always be possible. Okay, so this one up here in the top, that's kind of the most elusive one, because it can mean so many things, and it's always kind of changing what it means. And people are not consistent about using it, but I think it makes sense to have a common language to talk about these things. So I want to create a distinction between these two things here first. So we already talked about this a little bit in a different stream, but either way, a concept artist inherently is a designer, right? And what does that mean? That means that their goal, the concept artist's goal, is to essentially solve a problem visually. Solve a problem visually with, or it's what's called visualize, as like solving problems and visualizing ideas, right? That's their goal, right? They need to solve problems and visualize ideas. Where illustrators, they have to do something that sounds really similar, but it's different. They have to sell ideas visually, right? So a concept artist, their uh, their job typically involves like sketching things out, thinking a lot about like what would work visually, what could be interesting. You know, it could be if you're doing a character, then it's like, right, who is the character? What kind of character we've been dealing with? Should they have a short arm? Should they have a left hook? Should they be a man or woman? Should there be something in between? Should they be alien? Should they be dog? Etc. Like you're thinking about these things. Where an illustrator, their job is to, you kind of have an idea. It's already established, and now you want to portray that idea in the best way possible for the audience to now buy into the idea, right? So that's the whole notion of selling, right? So the jobs are really, really different. Like illustration is typically much more of a marketing tool, in that you are advertising some kind of idea. You're making an idea look good and seem good, and that usually comes down to like, you know, also good design skills and good drawing and painting skills and all these things. But at the end of the day, you're trying to do something really different, in that you're trying to draw a viewer in. You know, you're not getting this opportunity where you're able to explain yourself. As a concept artist, you're typically working in a kind of like an earlier stage, and you're working in-house or something like this. So when you have an idea or a visual that you're showing to a client or to whoever's in charge, then you have the opportunity to kind of discuss and explain what's going on. Where an illustrator, you typically don't have that option, right? When it's finished, right? That's at least the goal, is that you're creating something at the end of the day that needs to be self-explanatory. And if you have to do all the thinking and all the stuff, you know, as an illustrator, then there's a lot of work you need to do. And I think that's kind of the really big distinction between these two things. And that's kind of where we're just gonna start off, right? And then I'll be discussing some of these other things. I just wanted to put them down there as words. And then now we'll go on to just draw a little bit. Nice. So I think this big distinction, that's we're starting off. Like if you are a concept artist, and if that's what you would want to do or something like that, then you have to be very okay with like working really rough and trying out ideas, and not really just like going for making the pretty image. Like most of the time you're probably not going to be making a pretty image. Like having the skill to make pretty stuff is just going to make your concepts, you know, look better and seem more appealing, but that doesn't mean that they're going to be good. And I definitely see a lot of people who are kind of like in the middle on the fence. They're not quite sure if they want to do, if the temperament is more like illustration, or if the temperament is more like concept art or something like that. But I just think fundamentally on the surface they're just like really different. But I think what's really important is that in their own way, both illustrators and concept artists are, you know, designers, right? But concept artists are more like they're also visual designers, but they also have to be, often they have to be functional designers, right? They have to, you know, rely on writing stuff down. Sometimes they have to rely on sketching things like, oh, maybe it's a stick here and maybe it's a stick there, and then they have a pot that can kind of sit like there, and then that's hooking onto a thing like this, and then it can flip that way or something. And then, okay, that makes sense, because then the lava could flow out here and go into the stream. You know, like you have to think a little bit functionally, mechanically, a little bit like an engineer in that sense, as well as also having like a visual design skill and just, you know, good design skill and hitting the style and all those kinds of things. But these things are never going to be shown to the public or anything like that, right? That's just the process for like developing the idea. Where an illustrator, they also designing, but they're designing within this, right? Within the canvas. And typically the stuff they illustrate is already kind of solved. Like they don't have to think too much about like the idea. Instead they have to think about, okay, what's gonna make a really compelling and readable visual image for somebody seeing this image for the first time, completely, you have no chance to write anything. You just see the image, and you have to kind of understand what's going on, right? And what's going on is that it's some kind of dude with a hand and a different hand over there, right? And you have to make that interesting, So that's kind of the major discussion there. Hello, Schultz Division. Hey man, have you tried 3D Code? And it's great for concepting. I have not tried 3D Code. It does look like it's super cool for lots of things. But I kind of have like a small rule about like, if I can make something work in Blender, I will make it work in Blender. That way I don't have to switch tools, because that's my most hated thing, is switching tools. And most of the stuff I would want to do in 3D Code I can do in Blender, so I've kind of just accepted that. However, I will say the whole 3D voxel sculpting stuff in 3D Code, that does seem very, very nice. Otherwise, I don't really have a big need. That thing would be very nice though to have. But there's workarounds to doing other stuff, and I've mostly found techniques to do what I want to do in Blender. But 3D Code is a very interesting tool. But yeah, that's what that is. Either way, so that's just something to think about. Like, if you are looking to do something, just think about where it is you want to put your energy, because you could be both. But I think it's good to think about where your strengths are, and also where your wants are. Where do you want to be, right? And I think the tasks are really different. In that, I think in Illustrator, if you worked in illustration, you'd be doing a lot of maybe you'll be doing some sketches, mock-ups for a certain illustration. Be like, okay, this is the illustration. Then you show your sketches, and then it's like, yeah, cool. Move on to color. You get into color, then you're doing a cleanup, and then you're kind of going through these phases. And most of the time, it's going to be pretty regular in how the stuff is approached, right? You push through the painting and the illustration. Where concept, you never really know what you're going to get, and you never really know if it's going to be more discussion, more drawing, what kind of drawing. It's gonna vary a lot. So if you really like adaptability and being, and you want to stay flexible and try out lots of things, then that's a really good route to go down, because you're going to be challenged a lot more in that sense. But if you like more kind of like, no, I like have my routine, I really want to practice my craft of painting and drawing and those kinds of things, then I think illustration is often the better choice. But if you want to practice design and like kind of the engineering part and stuff like that, then kind of the more traditional concept art, like design kind of stuff. So hopefully that makes sense. I think it's important to think about, because it's I think it's confused a lot. And then you have terms like, it's not like, okay, but what do you do if you're like a environment concept artist or just an environment artist? If you're like an environment artist, they're probably creating environments, actual 3D assets and set dressing and these kinds of things. So a little bit of a different thing. However, with kind of the arrival of Blender in the recent years and stuff, like concept art has gotten so heavy on 3D that the job of environment artist and concept artists have become to like come to a point where they look more and more similar, right? They're just, they involve a lot of the same kinds of tasks. It's just the fidelity you're doing it at is quite different, where a concept artist will just not care about the topology, and environment artists will have to care about the topology. But the way they have to think starts to become more and more similar. Or not think, but like the tools they use, and the bridge between them, like it narrows, which I think is a really fascinating thing. I think it allows people to do more stuff on their own, kind of, and I think that's kind of fascinating. Don't know what I'm making here, but that's gonna be funny. I will probably be painting it later on. Then you also have stuff like I heard the term like concept designer, and I think it, for all intents and purposes, is the same thing as a concept artist. However, maybe the term concept artist is sometimes also referred to illustrators, because people just like the concept artist term has just kind of become a lot bigger. But I think a concept designer is very much just a concept artist who does design. But I would say that's mainly the difference. And still, the concept artist is still, it involves, you know, heavy idea generation. And what people call it doesn't really matter. It's just, I think it's more about the mindset and the kind of work you'll be doing, because people don't agree on the terminology. So it's always good to figure out exactly what the job entails and what part of it is that you actually like doing. I think, you know, with advances like AI, and we're not going to be talking about the ethics or whatever of AI. I don't want to do that topic, but that's something that's potentially attacking things like illustrators a lot more than it's attacking designers, because it's all about creating that finished, the finished look, and that's usually, you know, a lot of time and effort put in, where, and you can kind of measure the time, and that's actually where AI is really sufficient. It's just like, you know, creating an image. You know, I can see a future where we make sketches and then it'll render it for us, right? And that can be interesting, but I think that, so there might, if you wanted to go that way, then maybe that's a reason to maybe go more towards like the whole idea front and stuff like that, and develop that part of your portfolio. But I will say this: I think having the ability to create a finished result gives you a much better idea of like how to make ideas for that finished result. If you're just relying on an AI doing the finished illustration, you're probably not gonna make very good ideas to accommodate the kind of finished result, if that makes sense. So I think it's, regardless of you're an illustrator or designer, I think it's really good to practice both sides, and especially if you're a concept artist, practice doing illustration once in a while, push it all the way. I'm really bad at that myself, but push it all the way, see the finished result, and I think you think differently about how you might do your ideas and how that can accommodate a finished look, things like that. I'm just gonna look at the questions here. Kiria Ian writes, Blender is the best, I think, because you can draw 2D and 3D modeling in the same software. Also, it's free. Well, yeah, it's free. I mean, I like Blender. That's no lie. Schultz Division asking, can we talk about what they've done in Ahsoka with the design of the ships without spoiling the show? They are kind of merging old designs with new ideas. We're talking about the Star Destroyer. Is that what we're talking about? Probably that's what we're hinting at. We could talk about that at some point. Yeah. I mean, I don't know how to talk about it without, you know, ruining the show, but you know. Oh, and Schultz to be also right. Oh, by the way, you inspired me to draw by hand again. Haven't done that for years. Even got myself some markers. Never tried that before. Awesome. That's great. Do it. I think also, even if you're even if you don't want to go down that road, like drawing by hand, it's the skill is just really, it will help you. Even if you're not doing it, it will really, really, really help you. I kind of had this thing. Okay, this actually relates a little bit to the topic now. So I had this theory that if you learn to draw, you automatically also learn to sculpt. Not the actual tool set, but the ability to draw can really help your ability to sculpt way more than the other way around. Your ability to sculpt will not help your ability to draw. You think it might, but it doesn't as much as you. I mean, and maybe there's counterpoints out there. People will disagree. That's my opinion. I'm saying this with an asterisk, though, just with a in quotation marks here, or if I don't know. You have to draw a certain kind of way, right? And that's where we might get into the difference between like drawing and painting, but let's start off with drawing. So drawing is really interesting because drawing is inherently abstract, right? Painting can become kind of like a photo in that you can literally represent how we see the world, right? We see the world in light and dark and shadow, and through painting you can kind of get that. You can also do that with drawing, but the idea of drawing is more to represent something abstractly, right? Like if I have to draw a human head like this, like that, like that. There's an eye, there's an eye, there's an eyebrow, and there's a mouth. Like that, maybe a cheekbone and some hair, right? Then this is abstract, not in the sense that it looks really cartoony, which it doesn't look, realistic, but it's abstract in that this is not what an actual human head looks like, right? It's an abstraction where our brains can figure out that, okay, these lines out here, they symbolize some kind of internalized shape, right? And typically this thing in here would be differently shaded than whatever the background is, right? In real life, you can see that on my head, right? This is one shape that you recognize, but it's also different than the background and stuff, right? Where here the background and the skin is identical, but we're creating this like abstraction to make it work, and that's really interesting because that means you start breaking down what a head is in something beyond just like light and shadow, which means you can think about the head in a different way. And that's interesting when we're dealing with sculpting, because sculpting is also it's abstract in a different way, but also incredibly not abstract, because you're literally creating the form that you're trying to make, right? It's a 3D representation of set form. So the thing then that's really interesting is that in drawing we can kind of make a distinction between two kinds of drawings, and there was somebody who explained this at some point, but I think it's kind of interesting, and I'm going to call it constructionism. And then we have, so constructionism, okay, I'm going to write this with actual text because I keep just destroying things. Constructionism. And illusionism. Illusionism, right? So, listening to these two words, you might already start getting an idea of what one is, and this both relate to drawing. And I think this is really, really fascinating, and it's something that many people don't realize, especially when they're starting out. I didn't realize, and maybe you can recognize this in your own work or other people's work once you hear about it. So constructionism is all about understanding what it is you're doing in space, like in dimensionality. You're constructing something. It's almost like you are an architect that has to understand the three-dimensionality of what you're doing. So if I'm creating a box, I'm thinking about it like, like it's a three-dimensional figure, right? And I'm thinking about the back here also, right? I'm thinking about the whole volume. When illusionism, I'm gonna use my own box as a reference. I'm just literally gonna kind of be like, oh, right, there's a line here, there's a shape here that probably has a value or something, and then there's maybe another one there, and then there's another value here. I wasn't really thinking about the constructed form. I was just kind of painting what I saw, right? Or how it would appear to us in real life. So I'm tricking. That's why it's called illusionism. I'm tricking our eye to see something that that we know from reality. Like this is how we experience things in reality. Values like light and dark, right? And then I'm using illusionism to create that illusion. But that's all I'm doing. I'm just literally creating the thing. I'm not thinking about the constructed manner. The interesting thing is that like they have very different applications. Thinking like this, illusionism is helpful in creating stuff that feels real and looks real and kind of behaves the way that real stuff does in real life, where constructionism allows us to think about form abstractly in our brain, right? Like, so I've practiced this a lot. So for example, I can in my head, if you visualize something in your head, in my head I can kind of imagine a Jeep or something, a car, and then I can kind of rotate it in my head and look at it from lots of different angles, and then I can be like, oh, okay, I'm seeing the Jeep from this angle, kind of seeing it from kind of there. There's some seats there. There's a thing like that. There's a bumper. There's a big wheel like there. Right? It allows me to draw it from that perspective and that angle and stuff like that. That's what constructionism allows you to do. It allows you to, if you practice that, it allows you to rotate those kinds of things in your head and think about from which angle you want to draw them. You can think somebody like Kim Jong-il or just architectural drawings or something like that. You would need that skill to be able to manifest. Where illusionism, it doesn't give you that. What it does give you though is the ability to understand light and color and how the world actually appears, but not kind of the mass and the relationships and stuff, like how that works. That's more over in kind of constructionism. I hope that makes some amount of sense. But what's important here is that sculpting doesn't rely on illusionism in any way, because it's not visualized through. You can't get better at it by just understanding light and color, because that's not how you work with sculpting. Sculpting is a thing of form, right? And when you're working with constructionism, doing construction drawing, that typically looks like this. So we'll have, I'll do this with a thinner line here. We might have a perspective like this, and then I'm kind of constructing maybe a torso like this, like that. And I have a pelvis. Maybe the pelvis is shifted slightly, like that. And I have a leg over here, things like that. And I'm thinking about, these forms as three-dimensional objects, right? With a back to them. These all have an imaginary back that I'm imagining, right? And there's a foot here, which is also a three-dimensional object. There's a leg here, also a three-dimensional object. It goes into space and does those things. This is not a great drawing or anything like that, but it's just to demonstrate. Look, his leg is all broken, but actually, let's do it a little bit nicer. Right, but the idea here, right, is that you're thinking this way. Seeing this mannequin here. That's construction drawing. You're thinking in space. You're relating stuff to perspective, form, all those things. Practicing this simultaneously also practices your ability to sculpt. That's interesting, no? So let's say you had this, and then the next step is that you start constructing the anatomy and stuff like that, and you know that, okay, fine, the pectorals sit like this, the latissimus they sit like this, etc., etc., etc. If you're practicing these things, that will simultaneously practice sculpting, which I think is really, really fascinating, because they can seem like not wildly different skills, but you're practicing putting lines on a piece of paper, but it's because that understanding you're gaining, right? The understanding of form and relationship between let's say the human body or something like that, that translates. But it doesn't translate if you're only practicing the illusionism stuff where you're just painting muscles on people, you know, it might help a little bit, but I assure you this will give you a sense for form and space in a different way that that illusionism won't, but construction drawing definitely will. I've seen it time and time again. I can assure you it works. I think it's just really interesting. What's going on here? Thank you for the feedback last. Wait, have you tried Blender's motion tracker, camera tracker, and if so, what have you done? I've just tried the motion tracker for various little things here and there. Nothing really big. Schultz Division, and thank you for your feedback last stream. Helped me a lot with storytelling of an image. I'm a graphic designer educated within printing and typography, so the image spectrum is hobby based, but that's awesome. Have fun with that. That sounds great. Art Dude, I'd say that they're both two sides of the same coin. For the illusion to not fall apart, underlying construction needs to be there. If you're not drawing some ref, just my 2 cents. Really agree with the sculpting part. Yeah, I mean they are two sides. I mean, okay, right. So I'll break it down in a different way. I have this system here, and you can use the system, and it's kind of interesting. It's called the system. It's how I think about representing form in any given way. It's called Licolabs. Licolabs. Like this. Licolabs. And it's about an elf called Licolabs. So we're gonna create this elf guy here. Oh. Da, da, da. It's gonna have an ear like that. And he's gonna be a little bit rotund. So a little bit big. There, here's a foot there. And there's another leg here, there. And then he has an arm that goes out like this. Like that. And like that. Okay, so here we got a shape, right? And we can kind of start seeing that it's a person. Now I'm gonna duplicate it. And we're gonna create 3 here. Right, so these are the 3 ways of describing form according to me, right? And people call these things various other things, but this is how I describe them. So the first one is called LI, stands for light. Right. So this is how we understand form in the real world. So if we take this here, then if I wanted to create a form with this guy, all I have to do is just kind of put in the light where we would imagine it to be, and then slowly we're gonna start feeling. There's a dog really going wild out there. I'm really sorry about that. We're slowly gonna start feeling what this thing actually is. Like this, like that. He's kind of supposed to have a hand here, like on his hip. Is my window open or something? Because it's just really not great. Like that. Like that. Oh my god, that dog. Okay, so here we start seeing the form of this character. That's our first Licolabs. Right. There we go. Right, so that's the first one. And this is how we see form in the real world. This is how we register form. Right, so that's one way. The next way is the CU. That stands for curvature. So this is where it gets a bit more interesting, because now we're moving into the abstract. So curvature. And I really like making these kinds of systems because it helps me to break down what's going on. It helps me to have like a system to rely on that I can use. So curvature works in a kind of like an optical illusion kind of way, but basically what it's doing is that it's just the idea of us having the form described in a different way than light, right? Like this. Right? We're starting to see form now, and it has nothing to do with light and shadow, but it's everything to do with just how we understand perspective and how things kind of curve in space, right? So this is purely abstract in a different way, and this is kind of what construction relies on, right? It's the notion that something has a direction, and that can tell us something about its form. It works on us because the human brain is designed it wants to figure out the form of something. And if light and shadow is not doing it for us, then we'll try to use like the curvature of something. Like we'll look for clues in perspective to make it work. Some people call this texture. So you'll have a texture that's kind of following the form. The last one is the lapse part, and that stands for what begins with lapse, nothing, but what ends with lapse, overlaps. Haha, that was a curveball. Overlaps. Overlaps relies on something a little bit different. It relies on, it's kind of a shape thing. It's like this idea of like overlapping shapes, and the human eye, our brain, we know where shapes overlap and what kind of lines it creates. So it's the weakest one, but it's very interesting because I can do stuff like this kind of. So it's just me kind of drawing out these things like this. I'm suggesting a form, creating overlap here, and create a little belly like this, knees like that. Maybe even going up like that, maybe a chin, maybe the ear, maybe this there, maybe it has eyes, like that, and like that. It's a little bit more like an orc than an elf, but anyways, right? And this should probably look familiar to you. Like if you're seeing a drawing or something like that, then you'll often see things represented like this. And this relies on our pre-existent we like to complete the form in our head, right? We see this thing and we're starting to just automatically imagine this whole thing without it being rendered. It's enough that we know what the rest of the stuff is. You see this a lot, obviously, in animation. The idea of characters moving around and then the lines, they just fit up and it feels dimensional, right? And it's just cleverly placed intersections and lines that help us finish the form, even though the entire shape look like that, right? I would say these are all different ways of thinking about form. At least this is how I think about form. But fundamentally, it's all grounded in an understanding of the form, which I think is really, really interesting. If I want to get better at doing this, then if I want to get better at creating good shadow shapes like this, then I think the best way to practice is to practice, construction and understanding the form of what it is you're doing, like this kind of stuff, right? you know, like these kinds of things here is what's going to allow me to create those good shadow shapes, like the shapes themselves. If you want your painting to not feel like this, or like kind of like a little bit noisy, versus like having something that's very clean and, okay, I'm not doing a good job of like demonstrating that, but just something that's, you know, thought out, feels good, is it's integrated, is holistic, right? It's holistic. Then that's where you want to practice, you know, your painting and your lighting, like how, you know, like how does those things look on the canvas, like the actual brush strokes, and it's more like the quality of the painting or the quality of the drawing versus the understanding. It's a very different skill. It's almost more like a dexterity skill than it's as a knowledge skill, where construction drawing is a combination of the two in a very different way, right? And I would say that's one of the really big differences, is that like when you are a drawer, right, you fundamentally think like abstractly, right? You're thinking, I need to just make this window go away. There we go. I think that should help. The window was a tiny bit open, so I do apologize. You when you're drawing, you're thinking fundamentally abstract, right? You're creating an abstraction of all the stuff that exists with, you know, you're kind of creating these like pretend shapes and stuff like that, right? And you're creating sketches and you're creating all this like little pre-work, you know. I'm doing like a little break here in the arm, even though there's no line here between the upper arm and the lower arm. It's a whole piece, right? Then I'm creating that thing to create that underlying shape to help me in the drawing. You know, that's a sketch, right? Like you're thinking in this sort of way, where if you're, and this is all just, you know, how I think about it, and this can be really, really helpful, because you can think about something without thinking about like value, light, and these things. You're just thinking about the idea, the form, the aspects that we maybe contain on our head more than we contain them on the page, right? Where if you're thinking about painting, or if you're in a painting mindset, then you're kind of like, okay, here is the composition, right? Here's the background. How do I make this image look like a representation of the image I want it to be? How does this become a portal into something else? And you start thinking a lot more graphically and definitely holistically. So I'm like, okay, you know what? This is where the shapes are. Like there's a kind of mountain thing going on over there. Something like that. There is maybe a little bit of and you know, you might be saying that like, oh, these lines you're making here, is that drawing? It's like, well, no, because I'm thinking about the relationship between these two values and just like how they all relate to each other to create a whole image that represents something, right? So everything on a painting is always in relationship to each other in a very different way than when drawing. Like, and that's just a different way of thinking. That can be really helpful in trying to make something appear real, or like a photo, like not like a photo, but like a portal into something we're used to seeing. I think that's, with painting, you're mushing things around like this kind of, and then we can start thinking, okay, we got this here, we got that there, and I can still think about the forms of things, but I'm more concerned with how things relate to each other on a like a value painting brushstroke kind of way, right? But then if I didn't have the time to sit and do like a construction thing for this, but I still want to get that feel, then I can start using some of those other techniques, like curvature, overlaps, and light, especially curvature, like texture, and say, okay, I want this thing here to feel round, but I can't really change the shape. Well, then I could get something that, I get a texture maybe that highlights that that shape a little bit, kind of like this brush here, you know, then this kind of helps me do that, then that's gonna feel more round. It's gonna emphasize that round feeling. I'm not really doing anything with the shape, right? I'm just, and it's also not really doing anything with the light, but your brain is being kind of tricked into thinking that, okay, you know what, that's actually, you know, that's round for some reason, right? It could be a really good way to also not mess with your values, to just kind of just thinking about how curvature can suggest a thing. And especially if you're doing something more abstract or something like that, then it can be very helpful to use that as a tool to suggest something like that. You'll see that a lot in more stylized work and things. Then people use all kinds of techniques to suggest that it looks a certain way. Okay, I'm just going to be looking at the chat a little bit. Schultz Division, is it a custom brush pack you're using in photo? Yes, it's a custom brush pack. It's just some brushes I've collected over the years. I think that it's available in all the YouTube tutorials involving painting that I have on criticalgiants.com, the store. Digimiss, I really can't understand how much I value this channel. Well, that's, oh, you can't understate, not understand. Understate, sorry, yes, oh, that's great, I appreciate that. Art Dude, that's interesting. When I block in the light, I also think about structure. I wouldn't know how to paint the form if I wouldn't. No, except, I mean, it's good to think about the form, but I think, you know, like I could approach this in a very different way, where I said, okay, I'm going to draw the mountains. Now I'm going to think about it like a drawer now. I'm not going to think about it like a painter. So I'm going to be like, okay, you know, that is here, there's there. And you can combine all these tools. It's just good to know what kind of mode you're in. And be like, okay, you know what, here's a mountain, and that's kind of has like this kind of form there, etc. The mountain kind of is like that. Da 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 da. Maybe we have another mountain like that. Da, 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 da. I have a thing in the foreground, maybe I have a barrel in the foreground here, like that, and it has that internal volume like that. It has some things like here. Like I'm thinking really differently. I'm thinking really spatially and placing everything, and this is really, really helpful if you're dependent on that, right? Or if your piece is dependent on that or something, and then I could place some kind of flying bread, or a sandwich, actually, a flying sandwich. You know, like a very stereotypical sandwich here, like that, right? And we're constructing the sandwich. You know, we know how it all works and stuff like that, right? And yeah, you can think about that at the same time, but I think so I guess the point I want to get across is that purely just thinking about construction means that that quality of your painting will be so much stronger, or your piece, or whatever you're doing, because you are just focusing your attention on realizing the form from your head versus trying to do this at the same time. It's a lot harder, and I can, like, no matter who does it, it's a lot harder to do both at the same time. And often what would happen, I see most people do, especially beginners and students, is that they'll try to do, and also professionals, they'll try to do both at the same time. So they'll either rush into the painting part too fast, where they should have maybe thought about the construction because they're doing a character or something and the construction of the character is important. They'll rush into the painting too fast, and now the posture and everything of the character, it doesn't work. Or the opposite, they've thought way too much about, you know, the spatial composition of everything, but not anything about the mood, right? And that's where painting is really, really strong. It's really good at like figuring out the mood and identity and the color palette, the feeling of stuff. You know, maybe not as much like the spatial composition, and you could use 3D for doing this kind of stuff, right? And then figure out the mood afterwards. But depending on what your job is, let's say if you're a designer, you're a concept artist, or you're trying to any kind of design, you're trying to figure something out. If the task is to figure out the mood of something, then I wouldn't sit down and do this. Like I wouldn't. I would do, you know, this, right? Like that's way I'm gonna get way faster to that result that I need to get to, which is like figuring out that mood and stuff, right? Does that make sense? I hope that makes sense. There was some other art dude. I guess that was something I said. Practicing understanding the form. Yeah. Are you going to be discussing other themes like assigning meaning to art, etc. tonight? We can talk about that. We can also talk about art, but that's a really big topic. How might I apply this knowledge if I want to draw more cartoon proportions like SpongeBob character or Danny Phantom? Okay, that's interesting. So, cartoon characters. I would say that there are, I guess, generally two types of cartoon characters that are kind of stuff like Steven Universe. Classic Disney stuff and Steven Universe. I think Steven Universe is it can be flat, but it actually is that's not Steven Universe, but it is typically still quite form-like. So characters, they can move in all kinds of different angles, and you could see them in anime and stuff. Typically in anime stuff is very you know, it's very form driven, especially something like older animes like Dragon Ball or something like that. You can see all the forms, and then you got stuff like what is that, Phineas and Ferb or something. Phineas and Ferb is a lot flatter. Like the characters just, they don't exist, and you could see them from different angles, but you typically just see them as the shapes that they exist as. Right, there's probably other examples of stuff that's even more flat than the South Park, right? South Park is the ultimate flat. South Park like this, right? Like it's incredibly flat, right? So what was the question again? I lost track here. Did I close the window? I always close the window. I'm such an idiot. Oh, there we go. How might I apply this knowledge if I want to draw more cartoon proportions like SpongeBob character and Danny Phantom? So, depending on the kind of cartoon character you're doing, then your strategy would be different. If you're drawing something that's really, really flat, then you might be relying a lot on the idea of overlaps and those kinds of things to suggest forms. I think we're seeing that on like, so for example on South Park, right? Like there's lines drawn around the pockets, so we know that there are things, but they don't actually have any form. We'll never see them as form or anything like that. But they're using overlaps. That's what I call them, lines, whatever, to suggest form. Like we know what they're supposed to be. They still look flat, but they have that thing going on. Same here with Randy's shirt. But if you're doing something like SpongeBob, I think SpongeBob. He can sometimes be a bit more form, like he can be so squishy and stuff that he has this like very much a form. I guarantee you that whoever's animating SpongeBob, they really think about him as a box in space. You know, he is this and they're thinking about how they can do this kind of stuff. And essentially he's like that, right? And then behind the scenes over there, they're thinking about like that, and then we have the nose, right? And we have the eyes. However, his mouth, I can't remember how his mouth is, but something like that, right? And then he has his things like this, and then he's like, and it can vary depending on the character, but I promise you, like knowing a lot of animators, the more that's kind of funny, the more that the character can be kind of constructed simply in space, the more freedom they have, and that's kind of a big thing when you're designing characters for, like, stylized characters for animation and stuff. They have to be redrawable from every angle. So I think a famous example is kind of the bear from the Jungle Book. I can't remember, what's his name, Baloo or something. Baloo. He's like essentially a pear or something. You'll see that in a lot of old Disney characters. They will be constructed like this, and that just means that it's easier for an animator or for a drawer to draw them into different angles, even though they appear simply rendered in the end. The underlying construction means that they can do that. So I think it can be extremely helpful, and it's very much a target thing, right? Like if you're doing something that's really flat, then use stuff like overlaps. You can also use the whole curvature stuff, where you want to suggest that your figure has more volume than it does, right? You could have like a really flat character like this, let's like that, right? Like that. But then maybe we want to suggest that his arms are really round, even though they are really flat. Then we can do something like that. Or we do the same thing with his body here. Something like that, and then we can get a little bit of form or cheating with the form without having to actually draw form, right? So a few cool tricks there. How am I? Okay, cool. There's nothing else in the chat, so that's that. If anyone's new watching the stream, we're just discussing like designers versus illustrators versus concept artists. Right now we're talking a little bit about the difference between drawing and painting, and in which situations it's kind of interesting and applicable. We're kind of hitting the halfway mark now, so we're just going to take a little break. So I'm going to put on the break sign, and then we'll be back in 5 minutes. So see you all then. And I'm back. Just gonna give everyone a little bit of time to return to the stream if they want to. Good for you. Hope everyone's had a lovely, I don't know, coffee break, whatever break it is. Most of my days right now I'm just spending on working on this game. If you've seen on my YouTube channel, I have a video that's like I'm doing this parkour game, and I'm spending a lot of time doing that. Those are my days. That's what's happening. That's my full-time thing. And I bought something new today to help me make that game, which is, I'm gonna go on the webcam so it's clear. Like this. It's for programming. No, it's for making music, because I have to make all the music myself, I've decided, in the game. And I've never really made any music before, but I kind of been practicing over the past year. And that's been a very interesting endeavor, because I have terrible rhythm with like playing music, and I never really got good at playing any kind of instrument or anything like that. So it's a very new frontier for me, and but I'm having a lot of fun learning about music, because it's very difficult for me to learn about music for some reason. A lot of the stuff just doesn't click. I'm kind of into math and stuff like this, and people just say music is just math, and all the mathematical stuff that's fine. But I just think that the way it's being taught is just not ways that it just doesn't gel for me. But I found a few individual YouTubers who kind of speak my language, or the way that I want to understand it. And I'm much more interested in composing music than playing music. I have no interest in sitting and playing a song that exists on piano or on the guitar or something like that. I'm not interested in that. And most of the videos kind of seem to suggest that you're that kind of person who likes playing on instruments, and then you want to make music. And that's just not where I'm coming from. So that's been very interesting. So I just got this thing today. I think it was like $80 or something, but it's it's pretty cool. I'm making all my music using this tool called BandLab, and I will probably talk more about it in a future video about the game and stuff like this. But BandLab is an online music editor, and I'm using that not because it's good or anything like that, but I'm limiting myself while I'm learning about music to not use all kinds of extra additional fancy tools. And that's just the way I've always been doing it. Just limit yourself a lot while you're learning the fundamentals. It's also why drawing traditionally can be a really good way of learning construction drawing or something like this, because you don't have any kinds of fancy tools to distract you. You just have the pen and the paper, or the pencil and the paper, but you know what I mean. Schultz Division is a musician, so you're very much that's awesome to know. What do you make music? Do you play music? What do you do? That'd be great to hear about. So yeah, I've been using this BandLab tool, but at some point in the future I will move on. But so far I've been having lots of fun. I'm publishing some stuff once in a while online. On BandLab kind of have their own version of SoundCloud there, and I'm just like pressing publish once in a while, and I'm starting to make stuff that sounds like music, so that's pretty cool. And it's also fun because I have to make very specific music for the game, right? And that's kind of interesting. I can play. I did one thing the other day, which and then you can just be like, oh my god, this is gonna be the worst game ever, because that's the music. Where do I have the music actually? Is it here? Yeah, I'll play you some. And this won't get copyrighted because I made this music, so how would it get copyrighted? Oh, is it gonna be really loud? I have no clue. I think you can hear it, but I'm gonna turn it down a little bit here. but that's kind of fun. Let's get this done. So this is like what's going here? Sounds kind of retro. I like it. I need to look at the chat here. Is it possible that a person who is completely new to Blender could make a 3D movie by self-learning Blender? 100%. Why would that be possible? You just have to. Like, so it depends on what kind of movie. If you want to make, How to Train Your Dragon, then that's a lot of work. But if you want to make a short film or something, I think that's super, super, super possible. But it depends on what you want to make. If you want to make a car chase, those things you can make pretty fast because you don't have a lot of complex animation. Schultz, I play drums, bass guitar, electric guitar, acoustic guitar, sing a bit, keyboard, and trying to produce a little. Genre is punk rock, and I write myself. That's awesome. Like that's so great. I do wish that I could play an instrument like properly. I think I'm mostly interested in just playing the piano. I did have piano lessons as a child, but we're also really getting off topic here. We'll get back, but it it never really stuck with me. But I do like playing around at the piano and stuff like that. And but I think composing music is super interesting. I think but music for me is a lot about context. If I want to make music, it's for something like a game or a film or like a certain sound for something, rather than just making a song that I would listen to. I'm not gonna. That's not my path. But I do enjoy trying to make this kind of like I guess techno, but like running music, right? It's for the speedrunning game. It's gonna be running music. Sounds kind of retro. I like it. Wait, you're onto something. I love the distortion. I got 90s action vibe from your music. Maybe the synthesizer. Yeah, I'm trying lots of different things. This is one thing I'm trying right now for a potential trailer. Etc. etc. Damn, leave some talent for the rest of us, man. This is the best one. So the rest is not so good. So sometimes it's more luck than understanding. Either way. Enough about that. Let's return to the topic, but we can talk about it again in the future. So what the heck were we actually talking about? Yes, shoot the concept art related question, Ryan Taylor. Go nuts. All questions are super welcome. It just makes the chat even more fun and the stream even more fun. Enough with all this music. Yeah, okay. I was wondering how you go about presenting your concept in terms of lighting. I'm just going to go back to the scene here. The whole point of concept is for 3D modelers to reference, so the design has to be well lit enough for them to make sense of the details, but then lighting everything evenly also makes everything look kind of ugly and kills any drama, especially when it comes to things like horror characters. Okay. So that's kind of where it becomes a little bit interesting. We talked a little bit about illustrators and concept artists. So if you have to, let's say you have to make some concepts for a pitch for an investor or a client or whatever, right? And you have to really sell them the idea, right? They have to understand what it is you're all about. Then you would want to do a character. Let's say we have a horror character, right? We have a kind of like a Frankenstein kind of thing here, and he has his hands there, right? Actually, let's do a more sinister look. We could have looked at reference, that would have been so much faster, but we're gonna do it like this. Okay. If we have a character like this, right, and with a pose like this, then this pose and this this character, I will get to lighting, don't worry. This character and this pose is really good for getting the feeling of the character. This might be really good if an investor or a client or somebody has to see the character, understand what this character is about, or if you're in early development or something, then seeing this, you're like, oh, okay, it's the kind of like scary Frankenstein where his hands are up and he's a little bit hunched over and he's got thick legs or whatever, right? Like that's the kind of character. We're getting a vibe, you know, where maybe he's like angry also, or like, but he's a little bit funny angry, and he's like, you know, like that, or maybe he's happy, right? So it's a very different kind of Frankenstein, maybe one that has nice eyebrows and those kind of things. This is great for that kind of a discussion and for that kind of a decision making. However, if you are a modeler, then this pose and this stuff, it gives you an idea of like what the model needs to be able to do, but it also obscures some of the detail. Maybe there's a really important patch he has behind this hand here that we can't see, like a badge or something, you know, or maybe he has like his pants are a certain way. It's just not the best pose to show the detail on the character, which you might need if you're modeling it, right? But if you're an animator, then this is helpful to know what kind of movement he would probably be doing. He's like, okay, he's this kind of a body type, etc., etc., etc. And the same goes for lighting, right? If I have, maybe I can find something that's already made so we don't have to spend too much time. Why am I getting messages all of a sudden? Let's see here, what do I have? Okay, actually, this is pretty good. So I got this guy, right? This is my debug guy. Let's do this, etc., etc. If a modeler had to take this to model, that would be pretty easy. There's still a little bit of rim light and stuff, but overall, all the stuff is in pretty good showing, right? He's like the body's more frontal, everything is kind of clearly laid out. It's pretty easy to start modeling this thing. Also, the lighting is pretty minimal. It's not obscuring the details. There's a little bit of shadow here, but everything is still fairly visible. But if I'm doing, you know, this here, I'm gonna create some really intense lighting here. Create that horror lighting or something where it's very dark. Something like that. Then even darker. Like that, right. Then we're getting this really cool look, right? And we're like, whoa, now it feels really dramatic. But I think that's the key word there, is that it feels really dramatic. And that's great if we need to sell or need to bring someone into like what it is we're doing. Like we're doing horror dwarfs in the dark. This is the look to bring people into the idea, right? So like either to buy the game or to invest in the game or to say, yes, this is the direction we're going in. It's not great for a modeler. And that's just the name of the job, is that like if you're a concept artist, typically you'll be doing both. You know, you'll be doing early on, you'll be doing these kinds of things to figure out the style and direction. But then once you're once you're creating the final concept pieces that somebody might need to model or sculpt from or something like that, then you'll be doing something like this with a fairly neutral pose, even lighting, where everything is clear. And often you'll also be doing back views and little details, like this gun would probably be separate, maybe the glove would be separate if that was important or something like that. You would lay everything out kind of neatly. A good example is on Sigma Vodka's website. Famous work. Let's see here. League of Legends. Yeah, they kind of have like this kind of stuff here. Right, you see the lighting isn't dramatic and all those kinds of things. It's really laid out so that the character is clearly visible for modeling reference. And you know, there's still a little bit of a pose, and that can help the stuff. You know, back in the day they used to do kind of like completely laid out T poses and stuff for the character, where you would literally trace the model on top of. I'm not seeing that as much anymore. Happens sometimes still in animation, but I would say now the workflow is a lot more like you're doing something like this kind of, and then a modeler gets it, or typically a sculptor, and then they're good enough to move on. However, if you are working on a smaller production or something like that, it might be that you only get to do one version of the character, and that's just the one we have, and then somebody will just have to take it on for the sculpting. So say it really depends on the kind of project you're doing, what kind of size you're doing the stuff for, and stuff like that, right? So, but going back to the whole illustrator versus concept artist, this thing with the whole the darkness and the stuff, that might be your illustrator who should do this, like making this look sexy, like making this look good and looking dramatic and horror-like. That's maybe that's your illustrator who should do that or something like that. And maybe also for the final concept piece, where all the details have to be nicely rendered and laid out, maybe it's also the illustrator who has to do that. Like, it's more of an illustrator's mindset to make everything look presentable and appealing. Like, you don't have to sell the idea as much, you just have to really visualize it crisply, and that's typically an illustrator that does that. And I think as an artist you can put on both hats, right? But I think it's just important, like, what it is you're trying to achieve with those things. Sometimes you're figuring out an idea, and sometimes you're just making that idea visible and clear to other people. And that's the really big difference for me between concept artists and illustrators. And wear both hats. Okay, what's happening in the chat here? But then lighting everything. Awesome question. Just made it. Okay, Dakota just arrived here. Nice to see you. Awesome. Thank you for answering. Which do you think is best in terms of making a portfolio? Which would impress an art director more, showing you understand the importance of the callouts, all that, or a better drawing? Show both. I think it's specifically important that you show both. That you have the. I mean, it depends on what kind of. If you're trying to do concept art, it depends. If you're trying to do illustration, then obviously show illustration. If you're trying to do concept art, then show both, right? But just show that you can do an illustration. Maybe have like one or two, and then the rest can be ideas. It's just nice to see that you have the ability to go far, but you are thinking like a designer. If you want to be a concept artist, I think that's very important. That you can show that you have the ability to go the distance and make a nice image, but you are thinking like a concept artist. But it depends on the art director, but I would say generally that's the rule. If you're an illustrator, fill out your portfolio with illustrations. Just do like SMB, just plaster everything everywhere. That's the way I would do it. Awesome. Glad that helped. If any more questions relating to the topic, Dakota, you just arrived. You're the one who originally suggested this topic with like artists versus designers versus illustrators, all that jazz. If you have something specific with the topic in mind, then ask away right now, because I already covered a bunch of stuff. We did talk about drawing and painting and sculpting and how those things correlate. I suggest going back and watching that in the past, I think that was pretty interesting. I will talk more about that in the future sometime, because I think it's really, really interesting. And maybe we can do it in relationship to a drawing thing. Actually, we'll do that next. So no, we won't talk about next, but next time I'll just be drawing, like when we're drawing the alien character. I don't know what we'll draw. Maybe we'll draw some fantasy stuff. That sounds pretty fun. We'll draw that next time. So if you want to see me draw a character or something like that, then I'll do that next time, and you can ask questions about that. Hopefully that'll be engaging. Dakota writes, in the end of the day, learn base fundamentals of each part, but specialize heavily in one. Yeah, I think with the concept art, it's more important to show variety than for an illustrator. Right, an illustrator should show variety in your work, like, oh, I'm doing some sci-fi fantasy, but a concept artist, you'll more often be faced with really different stuff. But I will also say that if you really want to only do one kind of things, and those people exist, for like, no, I only make fantasy creatures, then you can be that person. Like, you can look at somebody like no, I can't think of anyone. I was gonna say Alexander Ostrovsky also has done alien stuff, and he's very much willing to do alien stuff, but most of his portfolio is kind of this like realistic fantasy animals, and that's kind of what you would want to hire him for. He's not going to do characters for you. He can't do plants and stuff for you, but you kind of know what you're hiring him for. And then if you want to get, hard surface stuff, there's lots of hard surface guys out there who, if you're like, okay, if I wanna somebody make me a truck, then you're gonna get the truck guy, or gun people. Lots of gun people out there. You get them to do the guns, etc. So you can definitely specialize, and if you're really into world building, that kind of stuff, you can also specialize in that section. It's a little bit harder to get those kinds of jobs, especially as a freelancer, but some people are really looking for world building talent and skill, and it's a hard skill because nobody's really teaching it. People will teach you how to draw and design and those kinds of things, but they won't teach you how to world build, which fundamentally really good concept art revolves around your ability to world build, I think. And everyone's just kind of winging it, but I definitely think it's a skill that can be practiced, and it's super interesting. Gonna drink some water here. Let me know, guys. Shoot with questions. I'm open right now to doing some things. If it's more portfolio related questions, that's fine. Job specific questions, designers, painters, drawers. I've done all of them. I've used all techniques I can think of for concept art. I once how actually I'll tell this story is kind of interesting. So I want to tell you about how I found out that I wasn't supposed to do concept art. Okay, Dakota just I'll tell my story afterwards. Dakota just hit he laid it on me. So let's talk about how to handle each of these sub-disciplines in a project like Black Horizon or Monolith, my own. Okay, cool. I feel like there's many artists in today's climate that want to have their own IPs. Yeah, okay. Oof. Okay, yeah. Seeing the sweat now. Probably very good question though. I will say that's a very good question. Well formulated also. Handle each of these sub-disciplines in a project like Black Horizon or Monolith. So the heart of the question here is how do you manifest your artistic abilities or whatever into a project? We could say world building project, but into a project. So the cheap answer, there's no right or wrong way. Obviously, you can just do whatever you want. But I think that Uh, Adrian Bussetti just writes here, hey, I'm just arriving and I found your live stream very interesting. I myself am a colorist. Can you elaborate on the difficulties of flat color? Thank you. You're a colorist. Do you work as a colorist for like comic books, or like are you just you're a painter, or do you work in graphic design? Or that'd be interesting to hear. How do you wear all these different hats by amplify your sole sub-discipline? But amplify. Okay. Dakota's just like massacring my brain. But it's okay. I really appreciate that. I asked for it. Let me think for a second, and then I'm also giving Dakota time to write more complicated questions. Now I want to give a good answer here. Fundamentally, when you okay, for me, if I'm doing a project, I'm doing a project not as I'm never doing it for myself, right? It's always for someone else. That's just how it works for me. That's not how it is for everyone. Some people just like making a world because it's they find it fun. It's an expression, whatever. But I think why you're doing it is a very important starting point for how you want to funnel your skills into something. I typically don't try to interject myself a lot into my work. Like, my work is very much a product of me as a person, but it's not a very conscious thing. So if you have a project, then if you're using it as a way to just explore yourself and your skills, and as a meditative thing or as a free time thing or whatever, then maybe you can think about it differently. I don't have too much experience with that, so I don't want to be... It might be interesting to hear from some of you guys in the chat, just like how you use your creative abilities in a project. Like, what does it do for you? For me, I usually create a project and then I have my mindset is that this is for someone. It might not always end up being for someone, but that's how I approach stuff I make. And it does mean that a lot of the projects I do, they feel like work, but I like work. So that's not too bad for me, and I never not have fun with the stuff. But I like that challenge of making it for someone. That means that there's some kind of thing to hit. You know, a goal to... There's a specific group of people who needs this, and that means that now my creative skills, I start putting my creative skills into perspective because I have some kind of goal that I need to a group of people I need to appease or please or have a good time or whatever, right? So I'm like, okay, I need to create this elaborate world, right? Let's say it's for kids, maybe like 8 years or 10 years old or something, right? So it's like there needs to be this like fantastical world where everyone can kind of have fun or whatever, right? It's like, okay, where do I start there, right? Like, what's the right way of appealing to those kinds of people at 8 years and 10 years? It's like, and probably complexity, you know, like for them is not the highest, right? It's like it shouldn't be these like really heavy political debates and stuff we're having. Maybe there should be some kind of moral justification or whatever in whatever we're making, like some, you know, that they can get along with. But it's not going to be overly complex. So that might not be the place where I'm starting. It's like I'm not really going to think about what's happening that much or something like that. I'll probably think more visually, because maybe it's a show that I'm being asked to make, and it's like, hey, we need to draw some viewers in. We want to create a colorful, magical world where we can discuss some interesting things, or we can teach kids about stuff, or we just make an engaging and fun show. It's like, okay, cool. I would probably start more visually in that sense, right? And immediately, if you're thinking about 8-year-olds and 10-year-olds, then maybe you're thinking about shows that would be appealing to them. You're like, okay, probably cartoons more than live action stuff and things like that. So it's like, okay, cartoons. It's like, am I thinking 3D or 2D? Well, I'm kind of a little bit interested in 2D, so I'm gonna go that route. right? And I'm gonna think about how I can use my 2D skills. So I'm thinking about colors and shapes and worlds, and maybe I'm thinking about something that's more abstract or something like that, because they're willing to go on a journey into a different land or whatever. And so my point with all this stuff is just like, depending on who something is for, I start aligning my skills in a different way. If we're going the opposite side of the spectrum, if I'm saying, okay, like I'm doing Black Horizon, which is my own project, there way more often I'm writing. You know, I'm thinking about like the complexity of the politics, the character dramas. It's a lot more real to me. The design stuff does come up, but the design is also really heavily influenced by engineering and science and the future and stuff like that, right? Like our future and the problems that are there. So I'm a lot more in my head than necessarily I'm on my page, and that means that like the stuff I make is just guided by something completely different, right? But I'm thinking about which skill sets and which, you know, roles and archetypes and hats I'm wearing for a specific kind of project. Maybe it's not my ability to draw really good shapes that's going to save something like Black Horizon, you know. Like it certainly helps, but I think it's more like the writing, the kind of world, the complexity of the stuff that's going on. That's the stuff that's really gonna sell that thing, and make it worthwhile. So I would think about it like that, like depending on the kind of project you're doing, figure out which creative skills will best, you know, elevate that thing. I don't know if this is like a cop-out answer, but I'm feeling like I'm kind of, it's a hard, you know, hard thing to say. If you have something more you want me to elaborate on it, then they amplify your soul subtle. How do you wear all these different hats but amplify your soul? Okay, I'll touch on that a little bit. So I guess you're also kind of asking, you're also kind of asking, how do I, if I have different disciplines that I'm doing, then how do I make sure that I come through in all the disciplines? So I think maybe that's also what you're kind of even more asking. So I have to make a game now, right? Like I'm making this game. That's what I'm spending all my time on. And I'm not super concerned if I come through. Like that's not super important to me. Like what I'm concerned about is if the game comes through what it needs to come through to be a good experience for people, right? And it's like, okay, it needs to be a speedrunning game, so it has to go fast, right? That you have to it just has to feel fluid and motion and stuff like that. I care a lot about world building, so the world has to feel like this place that it has to feel like the kind of place it is, and you're in a training facility in this game that I'm making. So the place has to feel like that. You know, I don't really need to come through and be like, oh, I really want it to be. I really hope that people can see me through this training facility, right? That's not super important. And if it's exactly not hitting, and then but I could probably be really anal about like the style and be like, oh, it needs to be this specific style because that's my vision. That's not how I think. Like I think rarely I think like that. I think more about like, okay, what will really serve the feeling that I'm trying to create versus like the vision that I have for it, right? It's like, okay, so the feeling that I want to create with this training facility is that it should feel like this big hall that could be rearranged and used for all kinds of things, right? And I'm kind of letting that dictate the look of everything a little bit. And then I have confidence that the style will just kind of come by me doing it, right? Because it's me doing it, and typically when I work comfortably, then I work in a certain kind of style, right? But I think that the style sort of just like develops as I'm figuring out what's good for the project, if that makes sense. But sometimes, you know, I'm doing modeling, and sometimes I'm doing texturing, and sometimes I'm doing like level design, layout, and then I'm also doing like writing, and then I have to do music, and it all just kind of has to come together. And with everything, I'm thinking way more about like how will this feel together for the viewer than thinking like, okay, how do I make sure that this is in line with this? Because I think it'll become aligned by targeting it towards someone and something, right? A certain group. I think that's fundamentally, but if you're thinking like really visually, then I think a good it's pretty. I think it's more important to know what it is about your stuff that makes it feel the way it does, right? And this is kind of the art director's job, is to like know how is something visually tied together. So regardless of like drawing or sculpting or texturing or whatever, then you know what it is that makes stuff feel a certain way. So Star Wars is an interesting example in that everything fundamentally is incredibly. Oh, there was a question earlier. Was it from who was it from? Was it from Schultz? No, Plexiglass. Who was it that asked the Ahsoka thing? That was Schultz. Okay. Star Wars fundamentally is really simple, right? They're trying as much as possible to create shapes and then create kind of texture and noise within the shapes, like something like, a Star Destroyer. Right, a Star Destroyer is a triangle. A triangle, right, and then it has some stuff. But it's very, very, very simple. The TIE Fighter also, the TIE Fighter is really, really simple. Star Wars design is really simple, bold. It's like one idea. It's almost just one idea. I love the stormtroopers. It's not a complex design. It's like whatever. It's like, okay, they're white soldiers and they're kind of like smooth, and then they have helmets that look angry. Like that's it. There's nothing else you need to remember about them. Like you don't need to remember the exact shape of the stuff. You'll feel the shape obviously, but the idea, it's just immediately recognizable. The rebels, they will look not the show, rebel suit. It's like it's kind of American astronauts, like the pressure suits they wear during the space shuttle stuff, right? Like the orange suit we all know. Like that's what we're thinking about. We're seeing this, and then we get the helmet. It's so dead simple, and everything in Star Wars tries to be incredibly simple, and that's why it's so recognizable. It's like stuff is really, really, really simple. There's kind of this notion, I don't really agree with it, that your design should be something a kid could draw. It's like, yeah, sure, a kid can draw it, but that's not why they remember it. Like, it's like, yes, sure, if we make a character that's a cube with arms, then yes, a kid can draw it, but that doesn't mean it's going to be recognizable, right? If the cube is SpongeBob, right? SpongeBob, then he's a cube with arms, right? But he's recognizable, right? And that's because he has this very clear-cut idea. He's literally a sponge and literally a square, and then with tiny arms and legs. And sure, he has a big goofy face, but it's just the idea is so simple. The same thing with Patrick, right? He's a sea star in pants. That's what you're thinking about, and that's kind of how I think about all my designs. Also, I think that's one of those things that Star Wars taught so well in like the terms of like live action. They brought these kinds of ideas into live action, like stuff that you typically only see in animation. They brought that into live action, and so that ability to break down what it is that make your stuff special or unique, you just apply that to everything. So for me, when I'm designing stuff, then I'm like, okay, like what do I want you to remember about this guy, right? And it's gonna be very obvious, right? You're gonna be like, well, not too much is going on with the clothes. Like he could probably use lots of detail, but then you kind of look at the hair and it's like, that's a little bit extreme that he has like colored hair like that, right? And then it kind of has a face a little bit sinister, and you're like, you know what? Like something is happening there where you're like, this it's like there's a clash, right? There's a little bit of tension between the two things, but there's something very, very, very simple and recognizable about it. And it doesn't have to be just a flat shape. That can still be detailed, but it's just this stuff here is not really taking too much of the attention from what is actually going on here. But also just the head by itself is just like, okay, it's just like a head guy. But when you're seeing the two things together, it's kind of like, oh, it's that guy who supposed to look like he was just sleek and normal, but then the hair is kind of like out there, right? And this guy, that's kind of, he could have been this guy, but he's not recognizable. He's not supposed to be recognizable, right? But in a way, they're not far away from each other. It's just that here there's a lot of tension going on, even though the idea is really simple. That's how I feel, at least, right? And I'm trying to do some of the same things with some of the ship designs, where it's like, okay, this is this thing. You know, it's supposed to be just this tall skyscraper thing, and it's just golden, and it has these three things like this, has an elevator. That's it. You know, it's no more complicated than that, right? Just very, very, very clear what it's supposed to be. The same with this guy. I'm like, okay, he's supposed to be this big guy. He's just covered in this like big red drapery, right? And that's it. That's all I want you to kind of remember this guy for. You know, I just want you to remember that he's the guy with the big red thing. So when you see that, he's like, he pokes out. And all these other guys, they have their own little things, but they kind of wash away in comparison to the things that's going on there. That's how I see it. Okay, lots of questions. Well, in the end of the day, learn colorist. Any tips on gesture drawing? I just started learning gesture this year and have 220 plus gesture done so far. I don't know if I finished your... I kind of feel like I went off track there, Dakota. I apologize, but I think it's recognize... yeah, like in a very mental, in a very psychological way, understand the bits and pieces that makes your thing unique, right? And just be very aware of those things, and then I'm very confident it will translate into 3D, 2D, and whatever. But it's never going to be, oh, we're doing the lines exactly this way. Yes, that's going to be relevant if you're doing animation, but that's not going to be relevant in the terms of like a grander project or something like that. I think so, at least. Unless you're doing a really visual project, then sure. Any tips on gesture drawing from Sionis? Excuse me. I just started learning gesture drawing this year, and I have 220 plus gesture done so far. I understand the point of gesture drawing is to capture the energy of a pose, but I still don't really know what I'm doing. I can't see the gesture in a pose, and my gesture drawings just come out a mess. Okay, gesture drawing, people. That's good. I am so opposed to gesture drawing. So gesture drawing is... it can be good, but I learned kind of like classical drawing, like traditional classical drawing, for like a year, and I learned what's called Russian constructionism, which is kind of the way that is taught in like classic Russian stuff, and also lots of Eastern European countries also doing it this way. It's a little bit different from kind of European approach. Funny enough, American classical drawing is a lot closer to Russian classical drawing than a lot of the European ones. Unless you go all the way back to the 1500s, you get like Da Vinci and the people doing that kind of stuff. They were also very much doing construction drawing, but then this whole era of illusionism happened in... Yeah, I think it's kind of fascinating. Gesture drawing. Gesture drawing, I think you're kind of like, you're thinking about, you know, it's like, okay, you're seeing the figure and you're like, okay, it's like, I'm gonna try to capture the whole thing in like one line, and then here is maybe the arm, and here's maybe the body, and then we get the leg, and we get that there, and something like that, right? It's like, oh, there's the gesture, kind of, you know. We're feeling it out, right? Or it could be even more detailed. It could be like, could be like, it's like, okay, here we have the leg. I got one butt there. We got this. We got that. We got a thing like that. You know, we got and then maybe you're trying to collect the things like, you see, gesture, right? Gesture, movement, etc. Those kind of things. It's something animators specifically really like talking about, and it is really important to think about gesture and those kind of things. I like thinking about posture and pose. It's kind of like gesture, but I like thinking about it like that a bit more, because I think gesture drawing has this tendency to always create shapes that are, they're kind of talking about this, oh, find the big line in the movement. That means that you're always going to create stuff that's either this, that, like that, like that, like that. It's always a smooth motion. And I think there are poses in real life that are sometimes incredibly awkward. Like this, for example. If you're doing any kind of horror stuff, like actual horror stuff, then you're gonna get awkward poses. And awkward poses can be incredibly beautiful and interesting. Right, and where exactly is the gesture here? It's like right, but the pose is there, right? But the gesture is a little bit harder to define because it's not following this like idea of a gesture that we typically think of, like these very energetic drawings or something like that. And I think here, and I want there to be room for doing stuff like this, and I feel like lots of people who only do lots of gesture drawings or think a lot about like that, they lack the ability to do like awkward things sometimes, and sometimes something really needs something awkward, especially for something like horror, or if you're doing like flat compositions or something like that, then suddenly gesture is no longer the way, right? So gesture drawings are fine, but what I would practice a lot more, this is the best advice I can give, and this like no doubt, I would practice construction drawing. So a good resource for construction drawing is something like Michael Hampton. Michael Hampton, who I think also is kind of like, oh yeah, you should do a gesture drawing and stuff like that. That's a good book, Michael Hampton, just like construction drawing. I think the quality of his drawing, like he's not a great drawer or anything like that, but it's good for understanding the principles of construction. There's also Bamis, he's also a construction drawer guy. And then various Russian construction drawing stuff, and there's some other resources here and there. And the thing is that when you're thinking about construction, then you start having these forms that you're playing with in space. Like this, right? I start having one like here and there, right? And if you get really good at these things here, then you can still have gesture hiding in here, right? And the idea of gesture can also help these things to come alive, right? Like you have to have that idea of gesture, but I think using the idea of gesture and trying to make it work in the context of something like this is so much more helpful and valuable than trying to do these kinds of gesture drawings or whatever, however you're making a gesture like these things. I think this is so much more valuable because this becomes a tool set and a foundation for doing, you know, this kind of stuff, you know. You're drawing in these things here, etc., etc., etc. We get the muscles and things like that, and we still get all the gesture that we wanted, but it's actually attached to things that we care about. You know, it's not just a bunch of scribbles, etc. This is how I practiced mostly. You know, I've also done lots of live drawing, and live drawing is important, especially for learning what things look like in real life. That can be a little bit difficult if you're just doing gesture drawing. If you're just doing like a construction drawing, sorry. Like this is kind of construction drawing, and it's super contorted, but we are getting a gesture. You know, we all feel the kind of gesture that this guy is going towards, right? It's super tense, and I could probably improve it even more or something like that, but now this is the way it is. And it's like, but maybe I'm gonna make the head go here even. Like, oh, that's crazy. I think something like that. I don't actually know what kind of pose I would want, but yeah, I think you get the idea there. And then I think if you're drawing from life or something like that, then it's very important. I'll give you an example actually here. It's a good example. Live drawing reference. Find anything. Something like what the. Is that a 3D model? That's not what I want. Okay, sure. Let's get this one. There. So instead of doing gesture drawings, and I remember this exercise, so I just remember this moment when I learned this from my teacher so vividly, and I'll recreate the scenario, what happened, and then you can see what I mean. Okay, so we were doing a croquis, right? I had to draw something like this. And I was like, okay, cool, I'm gonna try to make sense of all this stuff here. And I was just kind of like, okay, you know what? He's probably there. His leg is kind of here. And there. There's the foot. And I was trying to really match what I was kind of seeing. I was like, okay, then he has his leg going out there. He has his thing there, maybe. Something like that, maybe. Oh, it's actually kind of hard to do. Like, I'm trying to do it kind of badly, but I was like, yeah, I'm really like matching. I was trying to really kind of match what I saw, right, and getting that to work, right, like that. So that's kind of the guy, right, or so I thought, right, but I was always in this thing where I was under exaggerating the thing I was seeing, and I realized that I'm doing, you know, you're doing art, you're drawing, you know, you're trying to recreate something you're seeing. And the thing is, you maybe know about this from your memories, right? You always remember it better than it was, or remember it more spectacular than it was. That doesn't mean it wasn't spectacular, but just like your mind likes to make it more. It likes to make it an epic reality. And the same thing with your drawing, you have to make it an epic reality. You're seeing this pose, make it the best version of that pose that exists. And I remember my teacher, he was like, no, it's not like this. You have to like really like, it's like you see how he's there, right? Like how skewed he is like this. You have to like he's like, no, his torso is all the way out here, and his leg, it curves all the way out here, or something like that. And this leg, it's all the way out there or something. Like he was just completely drawing on top of my things, and then suddenly I saw what it was I had to see in such a different way, and it's like, no, the arm, it's way out here. And then suddenly there was this dynamic, like, that was created where I didn't really have that before, right? So I learned that what you have to do is that you have to look at your thing, and then you have to try to exaggerate that specific motion. Like, okay, what is characteristic about this guy? Okay, he has this head that's like there, so I gotta create this like body that's like that. Then it has the torso, and then he has that leg that comes out. So I'm gonna exaggerate that somehow. He has that leg there, like that. He has that leg there. And you see, I'm thinking like construction kind of. You know, I'm in my head. I'm thinking like this. I'm not drawing it, but I'm thinking like that. You know, I see already here I'm doing it too little. You know, this thing needs to go way further out, right? It's like, it's all the way out there. And then you gotta just exaggerate it a lot here. And then his head is there. And I'm not trying to create it exactly how it is. I'm trying to get the idea of what this guy is all about. You know. And then, even though it's not the same thing, I'm getting that vibe, hopefully, of what it is that this moment was about. Much more than if I just tried to draw exactly what I saw. I'm analyzing the situation and thinking like, what is this moment about? Well, it's about this thing with the leg here and him twisting his body, leaning into those things, etc., etc. And it's gonna feel a lot more like the drawing, even if it doesn't accurately look like it. It's just gonna feel a lot more like it. And that's the thing that kind of characterists and stuff they're doing right there, trying to create something that feels like that thing. I'm gonna make this blacker so it's easier to see. Right, and then I'm getting something from, and even there I'm still not quite in the feeling, like almost feel like this could be pushed even more. This arm could be pushed even further down to really get this motion here. You know, this is how I would approach gesture drawing a lot more than you know, practice construction and then reapply it like this. Figure out what exactly the motion is, like what's the motion about, not where the line of action is. Like, sure, that's also important, but figure out what the whole motion is about. And then this is the most important point. I'm gonna have to go to the webcam to explain this. Do the pose, right? Like, do the pose yourself. Like, learn what the pose is about with your body. Like, if you're just drawing and you're never feeling it out, it's not gonna. It's you use more of your brain. Use the spatial awareness of your own body to help your drawing. That's my advice for the gesture stuff. Okay. I'm gonna look at the things. Dakota wrote, I made this film for me, Denis Villeneuve. This keeps me up at night. Oh, is that for Dune? This is all reassuring. Awesome. This is so interesting because I've been watching other artists and myself do the complete opposite. I don't know exactly what the point was there when I said it, but I'm hoping that it was something good and not something where I was just blabbering. I can hear your search is very synesthetic. Do you often ask yourself how this texture or color light sounds? Oh, synesthetic. Okay. Do you often ask yourself this texture, color, like that? No. I think I rarely associate things with like light and texture. I don't really think that much about like how it sounds. I think a lot about how it feels physically. If that makes sense. If something's very bright, then I kind of feel the light hitting my face. If something has a texture, I very much imagine if I can use my hand to figure out a texture, then I'll be like, oh, this is very coarse. I'll try to feel it with my hand or something, or it's like, oh, it's very spiky. I'll tense up my arm, like, tense it up, and then I want to show that in a good way. I'll tense up my arm. If I can do something, manifest it physically, then that works really, really well for me. More so than kind of synesthesia. Kind of sounds like some of the ships in Dune. One of them is literally just a tube. Okay, right. So I think in Dune they also did that thing where this is my one gripe with okay, so there's two things. We find things interesting for, what is it? There's three reasons. Is it cool, weird, or important? Is that how it is? Or cool, interesting, or weird? I don't know what my point is here, but in any case, we typically find things interesting either because they are like, it's like, oh, this is weird. It's like, I've never seen anything like this before. You don't really know what it is, how it works, why it looks that way. It's just, it's different from stuff you haven't seen before. So it's original or different, right? Something looks good and appealing. It appeals to a certain aesthetic, a certain design hierarchy, or it is fascinating. So it's kind of like, a toilet doesn't look that interesting, and it just looks a little bit funny, but we all seen a toilet. But then when you learn about like the way that the toilet bowl inside the thing is shaped, like with that water lock thing, so that the water just traps the air, so that the smells from the sewers don't come up back to the toilet. You're kind of like, oh, that's kind of interesting. So it's kind of that thing where even if the form sucks, the mechanics behind it are really, really interesting. I would say those are kind of the three things that make stuff interesting. And if you can hit all three, you got something really, really good. You don't have to hit all three. Maybe you can't hit all three. But I most of the time I see a lot of people relying only on, does it look design wise, like aesthetically pleasing. I think Dune actually did a pretty decent job. It's a little bit hit and miss. I think the big round tube ships, they kind of suggest some kind of, maybe folding space or something, but it's also so simple and so just shape that I'm kind of backing off a little bit again, where I'm just like, okay, it's just a big tube. If there was just something about it that was kind of suggesting some kind of like, I need to know that this was for a mechanical reason beyond just a shape reason. But then the ornithopters in Dune, the Firefly ones, they are visually stunning, mechanically really interesting, and they look different. It's a great design, like the ornithopters. Star Wars often relies on just having shape design, but they do have some of the strongest visual shape designs, and I think the way that they separate the stuff is just very, 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 very strong. They don't always hit it. I think in the newer films they definitely got worse and worse and worse at it, and in some of the shows they also got worse at it. But overall they've had some bangers, and they're much better at it than other people. Other comments. What is going on here? Right here, like kind of like some of these ships. Okay, that was the thing in Dune. Do you ever worry about consistency to work across the project? So I guess this is a question for a little bit further back. I guess I answered that. I think so. No, I don't worry, but it does become a problem sometimes, and then I have to revert to. I always revert back to what's the project for, and then where am I creatively the strongest. So if it's a visual consistency I'm worried about, then it's like, okay, probably my drawing is stronger than some of the other things. I look at that, I'm like, okay, what are the qualities here that I like? And then if I'm missing some of that in the 3D, then I'll try to replicate that. That can happen sometimes with proportions and design language, but typically it usually comes together. Plexiglass response to Adrian here. Personally, the opposite often helps me imagining what a sound looks like, and a lot of my art comes from trying to visualize a song. I've heard that approach also. Lots of people are, there's also things where people are drawing from their dreams and things like that. I am incredibly boring in that way, in that I'm incredibly practically minded and project minded. Like in that way, I'm a terrible kind of traditional artist, where it's like, oh, what's your, you know, I just treat things like a project. I think that certain subjects are interesting. All my worlds and stories, they are always about mismanagement of power. So somebody has a lot of power, and then they're mismanaging that power somehow. That's always a theme. And I like creating worlds, stories, and visuals that explore those kinds of themes. And I just want to figure it out. But I'm also very interested in just creating a product for other people to enjoy, more so than making a nice piece of art. You know, it's great. I mean, I have, you know, art on my wall, and I found this one in the garbage. I found that one in the garbage over there. That's how you do it. Garbage. That one my uncle made, and how the heck do I point? And that one my uncle also made. There we go. How do I actually show that? Like that. There we go. I do appreciate, I look at a lot of art, but yeah, there's a hole in that painting. There's a hole over here somewhere. That's why somebody threw it out. But I'm like, you know. No, I'm never gonna hang them up. My idea is just to keep stacking them. And one day when, you know, I have a little bit more money, then I'll hopefully have a studio, and then I might hang them up. But maybe I'll hang them up in a way where they look like they're stacked. But I do like them also just being stacked. It's kind of cozy that way. What were we even talking about? We were talking about, I was reading the comments. I think I got through all those things. Nando said X writes, yeah, I think the last one was important. I don't know what you meant by that. Okay. I think I'm gonna wrap up the show. We actually covered some really good topics. I think if you came in late or something, I do recommend going back and watching some of the other segments. We did go about the meaning in art. Oh, I did want to keep it short. Okay, meaning. Oh, that's such a big thing. So we should talk about what is art. What is art? That's the first thing. What is that? Art is, you know, the bullshit question is bullshit answer is just, you know, art is in the eye of the beholder. I think art is, let's say art like this. Art is somebody, art is a piece of visual creation. So we're talking about visual art, right? Visual art, not music and all this other stuff. Visual creation that communicates some sort of idea in a way that gets you to understand a certain subject, or gets you to look at a certain subject in a way where words wouldn't have done it, or wouldn't have given the same feeling, or maybe it would have been more difficult, or whatever. And the ones that do that really successfully, I think those are the good pieces of art. It's getting you to understand something, and that something doesn't always have to be, oh, look at the homeless, or look at the political crisis, or something like that. It can also just be something that's visually beautiful. But I think, for example, this, I'll get the painting. Like this here, right? Right, so this is clearly paintings of the sky, and two pieces of sky, and they're kind of put together like this. And what's the intention of this stuff here, right? It's for us to appreciate a snippet of life that we might not have noticed or appreciated if somebody didn't paint it, put it on a canvas, and showed it to us and said, here is an aspect of life that you might not have paid attention to, because in life it would have been a little bit more subtle and it wouldn't have been as clear as how it was maybe abstracted and exaggerated here. Like the colors are a little bit more vibrant here, and the shapes are a little bit more exaggerated than they would have been in real life. But putting it together like that now means that you can appreciate that aspect of life. So hopefully that's kind of like answering that question. I think that's art, right? It's like that's what it is. And I think that it's an ability to recognize something in life and then enhance that and show that to someone else. Like for me, art only exists between people. It doesn't exist just for yourself. Like that's just drawing and visualizing something. If you're just visualizing a feeling or an abstraction or something for yourself, then it doesn't make that much sense, because you kind of already got it in your head, to me at least, right? And you can do it and it's a nice thing, but I don't think it becomes art. I think it's art as soon as there's a creator trying to communicate something that maybe it's too complex or difficult or weird to communicate through words, so you're communicating it through visuals somehow. And then we will understand that feeling. Maybe we're not able to put it into words. We'll try, for certainly. We'll like to discuss the things, but we'll feel them in the community. And I think so often movies is amazing, art form, right? Because you have your sound, visuals, storyline, time is also a dimension, right, of the stuff. And you have all these, you have lots of things to discuss and feel like something. And I think that's important to think about like that. That's how I think about art. If you're making an image because it looks nice, but you're not trying to communicate something with it, then maybe to me it's not art. Maybe it's just a piece of design or a piece of decoration or something, and that's also fine. I don't think that makes it less of visual media, less of an art, but I wouldn't classify it as art or something. I think art is trying to show me something that I wouldn't have noticed, and this just depends on your interpretation. But I also think that art, there's kind of like, art also goes hand in hand with skill. It's like more like artistry, and like I think you become an artist when you've produced multiple pieces of work that are generally considered art by someone. So somebody to me is an art. Like I know some people who are like, okay, that person is an artist because they produce multiple things that I would consider art. I think also something it's very quick that we just call anything art. I don't like doing that. I like calling the things that I think are art. To me, those are the things that I call art. I think the craftsmanship and the skill and that thing kind of going, like, art has such a higher value to me when a lot of craftsmanship, like skillful craftsmanship went into, like when you're using that and combining that with some kind of aspect of life that you want to communicate or show to me that I haven't noticed. That combination, it's very hard to describe with words. Maybe it has to be an art piece or something, but like, I think that's art. Maybe it's this idea that you are spending often many years, right, like learning something, and then in that one moment, it's gonna sound really corny, but in that one moment, like you're seeing the painting or whatever it is, then you're just like, it was like 20 years of experience and skill came together just to let me see that the sky is a little bit more green than I would have noticed, right? But I might never have realized that if you hadn't done the art piece like that, right? You could have done it through photography or something like that, but painting and drawing can do this thing where you're free to abstract things in a different way and interpret them in a different way. I think that's why paintings especially are so, or at least I'm drawn to them so much. You can kind of exaggerate and enhance all the qualities of what we're seeing in a very free way. I think that combination is like, oh, somebody like dedicated so much time and skill and effort just to show me this thing that I would have never thought about. And they could also talked about, you know, like a political thing or something. They could have showed that in a way. But I think that's where skill and the art it comes together. And this is I'm generally not really very big fan of, you know, abstract art, like what you call it, installation art. You know, like you have some kind of big wood beam with string attached to it, and then a flower, and then a magazine somewhere, and you're like, this is a comment on socialism, but not the kind of socialism you're used to. It's the kind of socialism we're heading into, and I'm like, I think this would have been better communicated as an article. Like usually it's the kind of pieces you only understand by reading the text next to it, and you're like, this symbolizes this and this symbolizes that. I'm like, okay, but then what's the point? It doesn't have any of the draw that you know, like I think a sculptor or, you know, or like a really good photographer who's, you know, wading through a very interesting environment we've never seen before, and they're figuring out exactly what this environment is about, and then capturing that in a photo series or something like that. You're like, wow, okay, I've never. I think that's art. Like I think that's where the craft and the art they come together, and it's like, wow, somebody's willing to spend so much of their skill and develop their skill just so they could show this moment in a way that it wouldn't have been possible to see it otherwise. Where, I mean, a lot of modern art, I was like, I think when the skill it lacks, it just like, if you don't want to spend the effort and the skill and the time to show something, then why should I give you my time? It's like looking at it, right? Like I'll just read the thing and then I'll move on, you know. And maybe you're into abstract art or something like this, and some abstract art is really cool. There's lots of great ideas in abstract art, but I think the majority is just, you know, hot garbage. That's how I feel about it. It's what did we wait? Where the hell did we go? Damn, we just went on. I have no clue what's going on with the chat. I'm gonna read and then we're gonna have to end. I'm so sorry. I just talk about the meaning in art. Lamau dude can go on for an entire stream. Yes, I can easily go on for an entire stream. That's like a whole year talking. Dude, no, that's like an afternoon of talking. You know, like I just talk a lot. Not exactly what it is, but specifically I talked about how I have trouble talking about what a piece is about. I'm trying my best to explain a lot. I've got trouble assigning meaning to my pieces. Damn it. I just like been rambling. I have no clue what the hell you meant. Like I'll know what went through my mind at the time of making something, but if you ask me what it is was about, what I'm trying to communicate, I always have the hardest time doing so. Okay, sorry for bringing it up so late, but I didn't want to interrupt the previous okay, great. That's perfect as a definition from old Greeks and Athens. I think assigning meaning objectively is impossible, although a group of people can for themselves arbitrarily decide what a standard or a minimum is. Movies nowadays is the opera of 2 centuries ago. The one thing I know for sure is that I want my art to convey hope and like joy, because I'm so sick of seeing all artists my age creating only depressing art. I've been in many exhibitions and the art is always so soul crushing, and I'm like, okay, it's time to open up the lights. I totally agree. I think I'm a very optimistic person. Like if you meet me, I will be a very optimistic. I'm like, I can also be a pessimist sometimes, but I'm not a pessimist, like a skeptic. I'm very optimistic. Like I think generally I'm a pretty happy-go-lucky kind of person. Very rarely am I sad or depressed or anything like that. I've been in blah blah blah. Bummer, the stream too late. If you're ending, hope you all had a good time. Oh, I'm sorry, Grind Boots, that you arrived now, but we are nearing the end. Oh, okay, what you said was very insightful. Okay, any case, so plexiglass. I will answer your question very shortly. Figure out who your thing is for. Think about a person who's like, okay, this kind of person. Like, you don't have to nail it exactly, but like, maybe it's a grandma, or maybe it's a certain group of people. You're like, okay, or maybe it's the kind of person like who you are yourself, and you want to communicate something to them. I just think about the kind of person you're talking to, and then figure out what would the art need to look like for them to understand the thing that you're trying to convey, right? And if the best way of conveying it is just writing it, then don't. But maybe there's something like, oh, that feeling of when you're just like, it's not excitement, but it's a mix of fear and excitement. It's like we don't have a word for it. Maybe draw that or something. What does that look like? It's like the moment where you're about to bungee jump, right? You're very excited for the thrill, but you're also afraid that you're gonna die or something. Maybe there's an optimistic side in that, or something like that. Just imagine who would relate to that kind of feeling, and then visualize that. But I think the person in mind is really important, to me at least. I think it's a good way of figuring out what it is you're making. And obviously I'm not trying to invalidate the other artist's pain or sorrow, but I do believe they should try and improve their psychology. Yeah, I mean, listen, nobody disagrees that the world would be a nicer place if everyone was more happy. And it's not that just be happy, it's also because the world can be incredibly depressing. But if you can improve your psychological state into a more happy state, then maybe that's also the reason that less bad things will happen, because people are less depressed. I feel like most bad things happen because people are dissatisfied with something, so they're acting out or want to change something or whatever. And we do need change, it's not like that, but I definitely think that there's also a place where you can have an optimistic mind. The world can still be needing fixing, but I feel like sometimes having an optimistic mind is a better way to get stuff done than being depressed and be like, what does it matter anyways, like we're all gonna die. I often have discussions, right, with friends where they're like, they're like, oh, the world, there's so many problems in the world, it just feels so, sometimes it just feels so hopeless, it's like, maybe it's too late, then why even try? I'm like, you said it, it's like, maybe it's too late. It's like, if it's not for certain that's not too late, then we might as well try. Like, if we're trying, then there's a chance that we're gonna flip it, right? And maybe we don't flip it. Maybe we fail, right? But if we don't try, we're closing out the chance that it'll ever be. So you should try. It makes perfect logical sense, and it's a way nicer world where people are trying to make a difference than just being like, what's the point? It seems so hopeless. It's like, then it's like, oh, it's too overwhelming. It's like, I respect that it's overwhelming, but you might as well try. Like, at least there's a chance then we're gonna flip to the other side with the bad things that you see on if it's global warming or inequality or war or etc. Right? Try. Then you might flip it, and you might not, and then that's just the reality of stuff. Like, lots of things didn't succeed, but also lots of things did. And I think the stuff that succeeded are the people who tried. Well, got to go. Have fun and have a nice evening. You too. I'm also gonna run plexiglass. I'm so. We'll figure out how to talk about this later. I'm gonna end the stream. Thank you all for sticking around. I can see we're losing people in this bloodbath of talking. I'm so sorry. I also said it would end a lot earlier. I will end it now. We have to end on tax evasion. I think if you are depressed enough, you can talk to someone like okay, I think you have texting to do, right? Then you call them and you just sound like the most depressed person in the entire world. You just sound like everything is. I'm pretty sure whoever is on that phone will feel so guilt ridden, with like being so guilt tripped that they will be like, no way. No, I mean you. Oh, this person can't pay taxes. That might kill them if they have to pay taxes. Like I cannot be. I cannot be the one who has to tell them to taxes. Let's just. I will cheat on their behalf. If you sound miserable and depressed enough, I'm pretty sure you can evade your taxes by doing that stuff. Either way, so that was the taxation stuff. We have to do that every stream for some reason. That's just the way. For anyone who came late, please you can rewatch the things. It's always rewatchable. We'll do another stream next time. I don't know what it'll be about. Oh no, we already discussed it. I'm gonna be drawing a character. I'm gonna be drawing a fantasy character. That's what's gonna happen next time. So if you wanna get in for that, we're just gonna have a good time drawing. Probably gonna get some suggestions from the stream. Always great, and I appreciate everyone joining. Appreciate all the comments. I appreciate the chat. Super nice to hang with you guys this evening. That's it from here, and see you in the next one.